Okay, so now that we've got our pretty particle effects, we need CrackToa to save our particle effect out so we can use it later for rendering. Now, the way CrackToa uses particle effects is a little different from Maya. What it does is it saves the entire particle effect out frame by frame over and over again until it just multiplies the amount of particles on screen to anywhere from 10,000 to 10 million, really as much as you want. Now, the way to do this is to first install and load our CrackToa, obviously. If you're not unsure on how to load a plugin into Maya, we go to Windows, Settings Preferences, Plugin Manager, and scroll right down the bottom till you get to My CrackToa, and just go Load. Oops. And when you do that, it should be loaded. Alright, so basically all we want to do for this step is select our particle, which is called particle or particle shape 1. Probably should have renamed that, but whatever. And go up to your toolbar up here and go to CrackToa and click the PRT saver. And a dialog box will come up that'll allow us to save out a particle. Save out a particle system, sorry. Basically, all we need to do is to double-click on our particle system. Now, because we only have one in the scene, only one shows up. Now, it's important to name your particle effects, because if you have more than one in the scene and they're all named particle shape 1, 2, 3, you'll lose track of everything. So, since we only have one in there, it's alright. So we just double-click it so it's in the Objects to Save category. Just make sure it's not in this one, the Do Not Save one. Alright, so really the only thing we need to check is our base path. I'm going to stick it in a particle temp folder I made on my F drive. So I'll just copy the file path in there and dump it there. And we'll call the source output folder partytime_01 and the sequence name to be tutorial effects. So just call that. And right now it's set up to simulate the particle system, all 300 frames of it, 10 times. So already that'll probably give us, I'm just estimating here, a good 70,000 particles, but I think we can do more. So if we want to get more particles out, we just select our particle system, go into party 1 node, settings, whatever, and we'll just up the particle rates per second to something decent, say 10,000. That shouldn't be too taxing on the system. So my computer can handle it pretty well, and already gives us a much nicer effect, even with just 10,000 particles. So that's done. I'm only going to tell it to simulate it 5 times because I don't want to be waiting around so long. Just keep in mind that the more particles you have in your scene, the longer it's going to take to simulate per frame, and the longer it's going to take to just do the entire simulation outright. I remember one of the particle systems I had in some of the videos took, I think, a day and a half to simulate. So yeah, just keep an eye on that. The only other thing we want to check in this dialog box is the enable channel randomization. This will make every simulation slightly different from the one previous. This is good for making the particles seem a lot fuller, a lot brighter, more vibrant, and just a lot nicer altogether. So it's going to be jittering the position and velocity by a minute amount, but it does greatly affect the quality of the simulation. So now that's done, we'll save the scene, and Once you're happy with your settings, just go Save Particle Objects to PRT files. Now, one thing to remember just before I start, these particle temporary files will eat up a lot of hard drive space, anywhere in the order from 1 gig to 100 gig. It's ludicrous how much space it takes up, but the good thing is once you've rendered it out and you've got everything done, you can just delete them and you won't have to deal with it again. So I'm going to save these particles out and pause the video, and when we come back everything should be done and we'll take it from there. Okay. And there we go. Now if we just bring up my temp folder here, you can see we have tutorial effects particle shape part 5 of 5, frame 300, and they're all about 2.5 meg. Yeah, do a quick properties. Yeah, 1.8 gigabytes, and that took about 10 minutes to do. So not a particularly complex simulation, but it'll get the job done. Okay, now that we've simulated and saved out our particle cache, all we need to do is save our particle effect scene here and start a brand new one, because we don't need this anymore. So we'll just go File, New Scene, and we don't need that anymore. So now we've got our new scene. The first thing we need to do is go again to the Krakatoa tab and click PRT. And now we'll have a small node in the center of our screen called PRT Loader. And all we have to do is scroll down in the attribute editor here and go Load PRT File. And then we just navigate to our temp folder. So F. Now, the only thing we need to do is, well, you might be thinking, oh, well, that's a lot of files we need to load. Really, the only thing you need to do is get the very first file, which would be Tutorial Effects Particle Shape Part 1 of 5 at frame 1. Just click on that, go Open, and it'll come up with a dialog box to load the other particle sequences. See, it detects that it's Part 1 of 5. You just go Yes, and then check Only Existing Files, because we don't want any virtual files or anything like that. Click the first one, Shift click the rest, and make sure you go check Enabling Viewport so you can see it, and go Add Selected Sequences. And there they all are there. Sorry. Now, if we again change our frame limit back to 300, so we get our full range of effect, and scrub the slider, you can see, and zoom right out, see our particle effect right there. And we can scrub all the way through it. Because it's cached to our hard drive, there's no lag anymore, so that's handy. And there we are there. Now, back in the PRT Loader attribute editor, we want to go down to percentage of render and change that back to 100. And now we have the full effect. And again, it's pretty real time. So, what I'm going to do is scroll right to the end. You can see it's quite packed with the amount of particles there. So I'm going to frame it in our view, go to our render settings, and change the render using to CrackToa. And I'll change the image size to about HD 1080. That'd be nice. Turn on the save frame it properly, and I'll do a quick test render with the default CrackToa settings and see how it looks. And there it is there. Now we're still on alpha, so yeah. So if we go onto the alpha channel, we can see that all the particles are being rendered quite quickly as well. But if we go into the RGB, you can see there's nothing. That's because there are no lights in our scene, and CrackToa requires lights for it to render particles. And really lighting is the key to making these particle effects look so pretty. So what I normally do is add 2 lights. So go create, lights, point light, and I usually drag it to the center of the particle effect. So I just eyeball it, doesn't need to be particularly accurate, something like that. And I'll change the color to deep red. Now I don't want any decay on this. Actually, I might give it a linear decay and put the intensity to 100. If we go back into our render settings, going to change the test resolution to 25% so it doesn't take as long. And we'll do a test render here. So it's still doing that. So that would be a problem with our CrackToa settings. So what we want to do is, firstly, global render values. We want to check override absorption, emission, and color. Going to change our color to nice bluey green. Yeah, I like that color. Want to grab our emission. We'll give it a nice purple. And absorption, that can be a nice deep green. Maybe emerald green. There we go. Next, we want to change our shading mode to Marshner. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm probably not, so I apologize. And we get all of these lovely controls here. I'm going to be honest and say I don't really know exactly what these things do. I just play around with them until they look pretty. Next, we want to go back into rendering controls. We want to use absorption, use emission. Yep. Now we don't want it to ignore scene lights because we need scene lights. And next, lighting, drawing path density. Yeah, draw point filter, final path filter is 1. I'm going to change this to -3 for now, and we want to use lighting path density, change that to -2, and change that to 2.5. And the emission strength, I'll change that to -2 again, and again, I'll change this to 0.5. And last thing we want to play with is motion blur. So if we go enable motion blur, check jittered motion blur, we'll change this to 10 and the shutter angle to 90. Next thing we want to do is make sure we save the work. CrackToa tutorial, and now we'll have the test render. And now we're getting something. Now I might turn off that motion blur because it does make the render take a bit longer. It's more of a final render effect. So I'm going to stop that, turn off that, and oh, actually it's just quickly change the render settings so it's faster. Plus I don't want it to take up the full screen. That'll do. There we go, much faster. And already we have quite a cool looking effect here with the hot red in the center, and it sort of gradually falls off into a deep purple on the outside. But let's have a bit more fun with that. So I'm going to move this to the other screen, and we're going to add another lights. So create lights, and we'll give it another point light. This one we're going to change to a nice blue color and give it no decay, and we're going to move it off just above it so we can get a nice 2-point lighting system like that. So now we'll see what that does to our render. It should give more of a blue tinge to the outside of the particle effect. And that's if I've got, oh no, there it goes. So yeah, it's getting a nice effect there. But what we can do in the render settings is change our density passes. So if I change the emission strength to 1 everything should be a lot brighter. And as you can see, that's way too bright. So change that back to -1 and see what that gives us. Yep, might change the density to 0.25 and change the final pass exponent to -2 and the lighting exponent to, say, 10. And now we're getting something. So what I'm going to do now is turn on shadowing in this main point light. So go back into our attribute editor, go shadows, and we'll turn on the depth map shadows and give it a resolution of 2048 and a filter size of 5. Now hopefully this should give us some nice shadowing on the particle effect itself, which should make it look like it has far more depth, like that. Now let's have a look at that and make sure our shadows are on in here. So enable deep shadows, ignore sheen lights is off. Right, so let's have a look at that looks. Now this will make it take a bit longer to render. We get a lot more definition in the actual shape of the particle effect compared to the last one. And we have a nice fall off from the center of the star swirl to a nice bluey color. Now I'm just going to do a quick adjustment to our colors, make the emission override maybe more of a tealy blue, and the override color more of a blue. And I think I might change the resolution of the light as well. So now we have a lot more color distribution. Again, we have the red spot thanks to our point light in the center of the particle effect, and a nice bluey swirly effect coming off the tail there. So I think that's all we really need to do for now for the color. So I'm going to change this to 512 because it probably won't make much of a difference in terms of quality, but it will make a difference in terms of render speed. Oh, there you go. Maybe 1024. Yeah, that looks nice. Now I will just check if the additive mode works, and it does look a bit better. You see how clusters of particles that are overlaid on top of one another do become brighter, and that is a nice effect. And so if I change the emission as well, should get something a bit different. Maybe not. I know, like I said, you need to play around with the settings yourself to really get a handle on what's going on here. But for now, we'll actually I might keep the additive on. I like the way that looks. I'll change that to a nice greeny color. And maybe turn it into a fire particle effect. Yeah, that looks nice. So basically, once you're happy with how your particle effect looks and how it's rendering and the render speed and all that, I'm going to turn on the motion blur to see how it looks as like a final pass quality type thing. And there we are. Looks alright. It's a nice swirly effect there. Basically, if you just increase the particle segments, the better it's going to look, but it does cost the render time a lot. So if I change that back to 3, say, turn off additive, we'll see how it'll look on the other one. And just for laughs, I'll see how this particle effect looks on some of the other presets I've made. Sorry, the render presets I've made for my other projects. You do have to tweak settings based on your different project settings. So I'll just see how the other ones look. So that looks quite nice. It's got a very definite shape in the way the particles are situated in space. So I'll give it a better orientation like that. You should be able to see the actual shape of it, just like that. So again, this is using the same sort of settings, only I've tweaked the values here a bit and tweaked the values in here using density and all that stuff. And I'm going to enable motion blur. Alright, I think we should be ready for an actual render. And that's really all you need to know about getting a decent looking particle effect out of this system. So, I'm going to save it and set it up to actually render. So if we go back in our common settings, image format needs to be IFF because it needs to be rendered as an EXR format. So in the file name prefix, I'll call it particle tute, and give it name underscore number dot extension, and we'll give it 3 padding. And we want the start frame to be 1, end frame to be 300. Render cameras as persp, and we'll give it the depth, and we'll render it at 720p. And enable color management. Next, in the Krakatoa settings, we want the render option. We just need it to be forced output to EXR, which means we should change the image format to where is it? We'll keep it as IFF. That should work. And once you've done all that, you just need to make sure your path is correct. I'll change the path by going set project, and I'll bring it back to the default path. So default, set, and now it goes to C users must even documents my project default images. So once that's set up, you can close that, save it, and the only other thing I'm going to do is animate the camera doing a small orbit as the particle system grows. So just go here, we want to select the camera by pressing this little camera button here, and the border goes white. We just want to press S to set a keyframe, drag it up to 150 at the halfway point, just orbit it, and move it to 300, and orbit it again. And now we have a simple camera animation, which should look pretty nice. So, now that all that's done, I want to save, and go to rendering, the rendering tab, render, batch render with options, and we want to go batch render. Now I'll pause the video here and we'll come back once it's all done. Okay, so our render's done, and if we just bring it up here, you can see we have 300 frames rendered out as EXR because we told CrackToa to render out as EXR. So let's bring one of these up in Photoshop and see what it looks like. So I want the alpha channel as alpha data. And there's our diffuse layer, and if we go into channels, there's our alpha. Now the alpha is a little dark, but we can fix that later in After Effects. So that looks good. So I'll just close that and bring back this. Now we're going to bring this into After Effects, and I'll do that now. So I've already set up an After Effects scene. I won't go into how I did all this because it's pretty self-explanatory. So basically I've imported the EXR as an EXR footage, and in the interpretation I've just set the alpha to straight unmatted and the frame rate to 25 frames per second because that's what Maya is using. So I'll just check that. It was actually 24 frames per second, but it doesn't matter. Probably should have checked that later, but too late now. Anyway, so that's done, and drag this into the Make New composition, and we have this. So all the composition is a black solid, the footage, and an adjustment layer, which I have all my effects on, which I'll show you later. Basically, without all the effects, the footage is barely visible. So how are we going to fix that? Well, it's also to do with the alpha because it was so low because it wasn't very bright. So if we add an alpha, add an adjustment layer, excuse me, go onto there and into the effects, and you can see all my effects here. So you can see glows, contrast, echo, vibrance, and all these come stock standard with After Effects. So you don't need to worry about plugins or anything like that. So what are we doing? First thing we want to do is to fix this alpha issue. So all I did was grab an auto contrast and chuck that on. No messing around with settings or anything, just does it all for me and I'm happy with it. The next thing we want to do is try and get a nice broad and tight glow in the particle effect. So if we scroll to a nice image like that and chuck on a glow like this, and that'll be our broad glow. Probably play around with the threshold a bit there, and the radius, and maybe make it a bit brighter. Just make sure it works with some of the tighter areas like there, and that looks alright. So that's done. Next thing we want to do is grab a tight glow. So this will make all the smaller areas of the image just a lot more vibrant. Just makes it look a lot nicer. Just like that. And then I want to put in a CC lens, which sort of fixes the virtual lens issue. I just think it gives it a nicer look. So already it's looking pretty good there, but we still have 5 more things we need to do. Simple vibrance, just bump up the colors, make it a bit more intense. And that's not even set that bad, or that much. Then a CC toner, just give it a slight tonal shift to more of a blue hue, just making the blues a bit richer. And the color balance, this is where I do a lot of the color adjustment work. Oops. And if I just play around with the hue, you get all types of nice effects and colors coming out of this effect. So I'm thinking I might give it a bluish yellow type thing. Looks quite nice. With a bit of purple. Yeah, that's nice. And lastly, an exposure. Sorry. Lastly, an exposure node, just again, even out colors and just make it nice. One other effect I put on is an echo, which sort of smooths out this sort of jagged, pixely look as it's being animated. Can't quite see it in the still image, but it does work. And just note that putting all these effects on will make the render quite slow. So really should put that down to the third. And that's pretty much all there was to it. And if you just bear with me for a second, I'll render this out and show what the final product looks like. Okay, so now that's rendered, let's see how it looks. Now that's come out pretty good. Now notice it would look a lot better and a lot smoother had I initially simulated it with maybe 10 times the amount of particles I did, but even though that's only about 100,000 particles right there, it still looks pretty good. And that's how I made all my particle effect videos. I hope this tutorial has been helpful to you, and have fun making particle effects.